horns of the altar were cold under his hands. He could hear the footsteps outside, measured, deliberate, getting closer. It was Benaiah, the king's loyal warrior. And Joab knew that this time, no one was coming to argue for him. No one was going to knock on Solomon's door and say, "Let the old general live." The ones who might have spoken were already gone. He pressed his palms harder against the bronze, the altar, the place where sacrifice was brought before God. In the law of Moses, a man guilty of unintentional killing could flee to a city of refuge and be protected there. But the law was equally clear that a man who killed with premeditation, who killed treacherously, was to be taken from even the altar to face justice. Joab knew this law as well as any priest. He had lived his entire life in the space between law and violence, between loyalty and blood. "Come out," Benaiah called from the entrance. Joab didn't move. "I will die here," he said, and he meant it. This was the end of a story that began decades earlier, a story about a man who was remarkable in many ways. A soldier, a strategist, a killer, a man who loved his king and yet at times acted against his will. Joab, son of Zeruiah, commander of Israel's armies. To understand how he ended up at that altar, you have to go back to the beginning. Joab was not born into obscurity. He came from the inner circle before there even was an inner circle. His mother was Zeruiah, David's sister. That made Joab David's nephew. When David began to rise, Joab rose with him. He had two brothers, Abishai and Asahel. All three were warriors. Asahel was fast. The Bible says he ran like a wild gazelle. And Joab was the one who thought ahead, who saw the shape of a field before the battle began. When David was still running from Saul, living in caves and hiding places, Joab was there. When David gathered his 600, the men who would become the backbone of his kingdom, Joab was among them. He didn't just serve David. He was woven into what David was building, thread by thread, long before anyone called it a kingdom. And then came the war that would make Joab's name known across Israel. After Saul's death, the kingdom cracked down the middle. David was made king over Judah in Hebron, but the rest of the tribes rallied behind Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son. The real power behind that throne was Abner, Saul's former commander, the man who had held the northern coalition together. He was experienced, strategic, and he carried the loyalty of soldiers who had served under Saul for years. The two sides met at the pool of Gibeon. What may have started as a contest of strength between 12 men on each side quickly broke into a full and bloody battle. And in that fighting, Asahel went after Abner personally. Abner tried to stop him. He warned him twice. "Turn back," he said. "I don't want to strike you down. How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" Asahel didn't listen. Abner drove the butt of his spear through him, and Asahel fell in the field and died there. Joab and Abishai pursued Abner until sunset, but eventually Abner stopped and called out from a hill with his men behind him. "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long before you tell your people to turn back from pursuing their brothers?" Joab blew the trumpet. The pursuit ended. That night the fallen were counted. 19 of Joab's men had died, including his brother Asahel. Joab buried his brother, and then he waited. This is worth noticing. He didn't act in the immediate heat of grief. He let time pass. He watched the situation develop. David and Abner entered negotiations. It became clear that Abner was willing to bring the northern tribes to David, to make peace and unify the kingdom under one king. David agreed. Abner was coming across. Something close to a real ending to the civil war was within reach. Joab hated it. not only because Abner had killed Asahel. Perhaps there was another reason. Abner's arrival could have changed Joab's own position. A man like Abner, respected, seasoned, the commander who had held the northern tribes together, where exactly would he fit within David's command structure? There was only one seat at the top of the army, and Joab was sitting in it. So when Abner came to Hebron, met with David, and David sent him away in peace, Joab moved. He sent messengers after Abner without David's knowledge and brought him back to the city gate under the pretense of a private conversation. There, in the narrow space of the gate, where Abner had no room to react, he drew him aside and struck him in the stomach. Abner died. David's response was immediate and public. He wept at Abner's funeral. He walked behind the bier himself. He refused to eat. He said before all the people, "Do you not know that a commander and a great man has fallen this day in Israel?" And then he spoke words that would follow Joab for the rest of his life. "May it fall on the head of Joab and on all his father's house." David cursed him, openly, in front of everyone, but he did not remove him. This tension runs through the entire story, the complicated bond between David and Joab. David knew exactly what Joab was. He never pretended otherwise. And yet something always held him back from cutting Joab loose entirely. Perhaps it was the blood tie. Perhaps Joab was simply too capable, too effective in the brutal work of building and defending a kingdom. The Bible does not explain David's silence. It simply records it. Joab stayed. Years passed. The kingdom was unified under David, and Jerusalem became the capital. The Jebusites had held the city for generations, convinced it was impregnable. They mocked David from the walls, saying even the blind and the lame could hold off his army. David promised command to whoever would strike the Jebusites first. Joab went up first in the assault and broke into the city. Jerusalem fell, and David made him commander over the army of Israel. The wars kept coming, the Ammonites, the Syrians, coalition after coalition. Joab fought them all. He surrounded Rabbah, the Ammonite capital, brought it to the edge of collapse, and then sent word to David, "Come and finish this yourself, so the city bears your name and not mine." There was something almost deliberate in that gesture. The instinct of a man who understood the politics of glory, who knew that kings needed to be seen at the front of their own victories. But in the midst of that same campaign, Joab received an order, and it did not begin with him. David sent him a letter. The man who carried that letter was named Uriah the Hittite, one of David's own mighty men, one of the 30 best warriors in Israel. A loyal soldier. The letter said, "Place Uriah where the fighting is hardest, then pull the men around him back and let him be struck down." Uriah carried that letter himself, not knowing what was written in it. Joab read it, and he obeyed. He positioned Uriah near the wall where the city's defenders fought hardest. Uriah died. Joab sent back the battle report with a careful word to the messenger. "If the king grows angry about the losses near the wall, just add this at the end: Uriah the Hittite is dead." David would understand. Joab now carried something heavier than battlefield blood. He had executed a command that turned an innocent man into a casualty of someone else's sin. Uriah was one of the 30, a man who had earned his place among the best soldiers in Israel. A man who, when David had tried to send him home to his wife, had refused, saying he could not go to his house while the ark and his fellow soldiers were in the field. That kind of loyalty. Dead now, near a wall, because of a letter. The Bible gives us no window into what Joab thought about it. No hesitation, no record of protest. It simply says he obeyed, and the story moves on, Then came Absalom, David's son, a handsome, gifted, and ambitious man. Dangerous in the particular way of a man who has convinced himself that what he wants is the same thing as what is right. He had killed his half-brother Amnon in revenge for what Amnon had done to their sister Tamar. Then he fled. David mourned and longed for his son, but could not bring himself to send for him. 3 years passed with that silence between them. Joab watched what the unresolved grief was doing to the king. And he made a move, not a military one, but something surprisingly subtle for a man of his temperament. He found a wise woman from Tekoa and coached her carefully, shaping the story she would tell and the logic she would walk the king into. She went before David with a fabricated account. 2 sons, one who had killed the other. A family now demanding blood for blood. David ruled in her favor with the confidence of a judge who had no idea he was the subject of the case. Then she turned it back on him slowly, step by step, until there was nowhere left to stand. The king had just judged against his own reasoning. Why then has the king not brought back his own banished son? Joab had built that trap, and David had walked into it willingly. David allowed Absalom to return to Jerusalem, but he would not see him. For 2 full years, Absalom lived in the city without once coming before his father. When he finally wanted Joab to arrange a meeting, Joab didn't come. Absalom sent for him twice. Twice, Joab did not respond. So Absalom set fire to Joab's barley field. It is hard not to pause at that. The man who had arranged his entire return from exile. Absalom burned his crops to force a conversation, and Joab came. The meeting with David happened. Father and son stood before each other. David kissed Absalom. Everyone assumed the matter was finished. It was not finished. Absalom had been building something across all those years of waiting. He positioned himself at the city gate every morning, met every man with a grievance, listened to their cases, and told them that if he were judge, every man would get justice. Year after year, quiet, patient, deliberate, until he raised his rebellion and nearly took everything. David fled Jerusalem on foot, weeping, barefoot on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. The city fell without a fight. His own son was marching toward the throne, and Joab went with David. Everything he had done on Absalom's behalf, arranging his return, engineering the reunion, none of it changed where his loyalty finally rested. When the choice became unavoidable, Joab chose David. Without hesitation, the decisive battle came in the forest of Ephraim. Before it began, David gave a command loud enough for every soldier present to hear it. Deal gently with the young man Absalom. For my sake. The fighting was brutal. 20,000 men died that day. The terrain itself became an enemy. The ravines and dense trees swallowing men who tried to flee through them. The forest consumed more lives than the sword. And Absalom, riding his mule through the thick canopy of oaks, got his long hair caught in the branches and was left hanging in the air as the mule ran on without him. A soldier found him there and reported it to Joab. Joab asked why the man hadn't struck him down immediately. The soldier answered plainly, "I heard what the king commanded. I would not touch the king's son for 1,000 pieces of silver." Joab didn't argue. He picked up 3 spears and drove them into Absalom's chest while he still hung there. 10 of his armor-bearers surrounded Absalom and finished the work. The rebellion ended that day, and David fell apart. His first question when the messenger arrived was not about the battle or the dead. It was, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" When the answer came, he went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. "My son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would I had died instead of you?" The victory became a funeral. The army crept back into the city like men ashamed of having won. And Joab went to David and said what no one else in that moment would dare to say. He did not soften it. He told the king directly, "You have shamed every man who saved your life today, your sons' lives, your daughters' lives. You are behaving as though you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. If you do not go out now and speak to your men, not one of them will be left with you by tonight. And that will be worse than anything you have suffered since your youth." Hard words, true words. The kind that only decades of standing beside someone gives you the right to say without it becoming cruelty. David got up. He went to the gate and sat before his people. Then David gave the command of the army to Amasa, the man who had led Absalom's rebel forces. The dust from Absalom's revolt had barely settled when a second fire started. A man named Sheba, son of Bichri, blew a ram's horn and pulled the men of Israel away from David again, smaller than the last rebellion, but it needed to be extinguished before it spread. David sent Amasa to gather troops, giving him 3 days. Amasa did not appear. Abishai took command and led the forces out. Joab went along, not as the designated leader, but armed, present, watching. They met Amasa on the road at Gibeon. Joab moved toward him with the ease of a man approaching an old companion. He reached out with his right hand, the hand of greeting, took hold of Amasa's beard to kiss him in welcome. His left hand drew his sword. He drove it into Amasa's stomach. Amasa died there on the road. Joab moved on. He pursued Sheba to the city of Abel-Beth-Maachah, raised a siege mound against the city, and began battering the wall. A wise woman called out from the wall and argued for her city. She proposed a solution. Within the hour, Sheba's head came over the wall. Joab blew the trumpet, the army dispersed, and he rode back to Jerusalem, as though nothing had happened on the road at Gibeon. 3 deaths now stood to Joab's account: Abner, Absalom, Amasa, with Uriah's shadow over all of it, killed by a king's order Joab had carried out. Each killing had its own logic. Abner had killed his brother. Absalom was a living rebellion that had cost 20,000 lives. Amasa was the very man who had led Absalom's army during the rebellion. But having a reason for something is not the same as being right about it. David grew old. His body failed him. He could no longer keep warm, no longer hold the vitality that had once made him the axis of the entire kingdom. And around the edges of his slow decline, the question that had been hovering for years finally descended. Who comes after? Adonijah prepared chariots, horsemen, and 50 men to run before him, a visible claim to royal succession. He threw a large feast at En-Rogel, filled with David's sons and the men of Judah. He carefully excluded Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, and the men loyal to David's inner circle. Joab was at that feast. Joab had chosen Adonijah. After all of it, every campaign, every war, every decade at the center of David's world, Joab read the last turn of the story wrong. Nathan moved quickly. He went to Bathsheba, and together they came before David, reminding him of his oath. Solomon was to sit on the throne. David acted with a kind of clarity that age had not taken from him. He commanded Zadok the priest, Nathan, and Benaiah to take Solomon to the Gihon spring immediately and anoint him king. The trumpet sounded. When the news reached Adonijah and all those he had invited, the guests rose and went their own way. Adonijah ran to the tabernacle and grabbed the horns of the altar, asking for his life. Solomon let him live for the time being. David died not long after. But before he did, he spoke to Solomon plainly. He said, "You know what Joab son of Zeruiah did to Abner son of Ner and to Amasa son of Jether, the two commanders of Israel's armies. He shed blood of war in a time of peace. That blood is on his belt and on his sandals. Do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. David had lived for decades knowing what Joab was, had cursed him publicly, had relied on him through everything, and had never brought it to a formal account. Now he placed that accounting in Solomon's hands. Whether that was a final act of wisdom or the weight of something long unfinished, the Bible does not say. Solomon received it as an instruction, and he did not lay it aside. When Joab learned that Adonijah had been executed because Adonijah had asked for Abishag as a wife, Joab understood what was coming. He ran to the tabernacle. His hands found the horns of the altar, the same bronze, the same stone, the same cold surface where Adonijah had grasped for his life not long before. Except this time, there was no one coming to negotiate. No one who would carry a plea back to Solomon and find mercy waiting on the other side. Benaiah came and called him out. Joab refused. Benaiah returned to Solomon. And Solomon's answer was grounded in the very law Joab was standing inside. A man who kills treacherously and with premeditation is not shielded by the altar. The law said so plainly. Go back, Solomon told Benaiah. Do as he has said. Strike him down there. Let the blood he shed return on his own head. The blood of Abner, the blood of Amasa. Benaiah returned. And at the altar of the Lord, in the place where sacrifice was brought and mercy was sought, Joab died. He was buried at his own property in the wilderness. So what do we do with Joab? He does not fit a simple category. The story does not invite you to dismiss him as a villain. It does not hold him up as someone to admire. He is something more uncomfortable, a man of genuine ability and fierce loyalty, who carried inside him a violence he never once truly surrendered. Here is the thread under everything. Joab always had a reason. Every single time. Abner had killed his brother. Amasa was unreliable and had served the enemy. Absalom was a rebellion that had already cost 20,000 lives and would cost more if it continued. There was always an explanation ready, a logic that almost held, if you angled hard enough toward it. But God's law did not angle, and the king's word did not bend for Joab's calculations. When he killed Abner, peace had already been made. When he drove spears into Absalom, every soldier in the army had heard the order to spare him. When he reached for Amasa's beard with his right hand, his left hand already knew what it was going for. Each time, Joab placed his own reading of the situation above the authority over him. Each time, he substituted his judgment for a word that had been spoken clearly. How often do we do the same? Not with swords, but with decisions, with words, with the way we handle the people who have wronged us or who occupy a space we feel belongs to us. We tell ourselves what Joab almost certainly told himself. I know what this situation actually requires. Someone has to act. No one else will deal with it. And sometimes we are even right about the situation. That is exactly what makes it dangerous. Joab was often right. His rebuke of David after the battle in the forest of Ephraim was accurate and necessary. His battlefield instincts were rarely wrong. But being right about a situation does not give a person the authority to act outside the limits placed on them. Discernment is a gift. When it quietly begins to replace submission, it becomes something else. Something that wears the face of wisdom and answers only to itself. This is the specific danger that belongs to capable people, not to the obviously reckless. To those who have genuine experience, earned real authority, a track record that actually holds up. That record can slowly become a quiet permission they have issued to themselves. I have been right before. I see how this ends. I will handle it. A law they have written for themselves, dressed up as competence. If you carry any kind of responsibility in your family, your work, your church, Joab is a mirror worth looking into honestly, not as a warning about the people around you, as a question directed at yourself. Can you be told that you are wrong and actually receive it? Can someone redirect you? And can you stay still long enough to let that happen? Can you hold back when every instinct says the moment is right now? What are you still carrying that you keep calling justice? What old wound are you holding on to? Patient as Joab was patient, waiting for the moment to settle it on your own terms. He filed the death of Asahel away quietly. He did not explode in grief. He waited years. And when the moment came, he moved. That patience was not surrender. It was delay. David wept for Absalom, publicly, extravagantly, in a way that genuinely cost him standing with the men who had just bled for his survival. Joab read that as weakness. In purely practical terms, he was not entirely wrong. But David's capacity to grieve, to feel what things actually cost, to not close completely against loss, was tied to something that kept pulling him back toward God even after his worst failures. It was not weakness. It was the part of him that was still open. Joab did not seem to weep. Not once does the Bible record it. He moved. He solved. He stepped over Amasa's body on the road and kept walking north without breaking stride. There is a version of strength that looks like never stopping to feel anything. But there is another kind, the kind David had, broken and imperfect as he was, that is willing to stand in the full weight of a moment, even when that weight is costly and inconvenient. Scripture shows us no moment of Joab before God, no word spoken in prayer, no morning when he lifted his hands to the Lord and said anything at all. The portrait the Bible gives us is of a man whose entire world was built on the ground level. Kings, armies, rivals, position, loyalty. The relationship with God that gave David's life its deepest shape, even through his worst failures, is simply not visible in Joab. Not once. David sinned gravely. He used his position to take another man's wife and arrange that man's death. The Bible records all of it without softening. But David returned. He lifted his hands to God. He wrote prayers that have crossed 3,000 years and still find people in their darkest places. A life built in genuine relationship with God leaves traces in how a person speaks, in what they return to when things collapse, in the shape of their repentance when they fail. David's life left those traces everywhere, even inside the wreckage of his worst seasons. The measure of a life is not the number of battles won, and it is not the ground you helped secure for someone else's kingdom to stand on. Joab's story ends with a grave on his own land in the wilderness. Just a man, his property, and the quiet of the wilderness around it. Solomon went further, and in his days Israel experienced an era of peace and rest. The temple was built. Israel rested. And the ground that peace stood on, the secured borders, the subdued enemies, the decades of warfare that made the quiet possible. Some of that ran directly through Joab's victories. He laid foundations he would never stand on. He helped build a kingdom he would not live to see at peace. That is the real sorrow in his story, not the kind that excuses everything, but the honest sorrow of watching someone who had genuine gifts, who gave real service, who was capable of more than the record shows, and who could not release what he held tightly long enough to step into what might have been waiting for him on the other side of it. Joab had moved fast his entire life. Decisive. He never waited for permission when he had already made the call in his own head. And now there was nowhere to move, No battle to plan, no rival to outmaneuver. Nothing between him and what was coming except bronze that could not speak and stone that could not intervene. David turned back toward God. He ran to God, sometimes crawling, sometimes weeping, but always moving back toward that relationship. Joab ran to a place and hoped God was in it. One of them left Psalms behind. The other left a grave in the wilderness. And you are somewhere in this story right now, not watching from outside it, standing at a safe distance. Your choices are building on each other. Your patterns are forming. The things you are holding on to are shaping what you are becoming. Your hands are reaching toward something. The question is not whether you are capable. Joab was capable. The question is what you are building your life around, and whether, when the moment comes that asks for genuine surrender, when the thing you have always handled yourself is taken out of your hands, you will be able to open them. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoy living and inspiring biblical stories, subscribe to Living Bible Stories channel so you don't miss new videos. We'd appreciate your like and comment. It really helps the channel grow.